Hey everybody, it's Don here. I'm in my hometown of Yellow Springs, Ohio today in Glen Helen. And my goal today is to take a walk through a little part of this preserve, Glen Helen Nature Preserve, and show you a couple of easy features to get to right off of the parking area on Corey Street. That will include a big beaver dam, which is a kind of a new development in the last 3 or 4 years. And then a trip to the actual Yellow Spring, which is the namesake for the town. So it's a beautiful day, November 14th, 2023, and glad to have you along today. All right, we'll start our walk today in the vicinity of the Trailside Museum, which is a small museum near the parking area on Corey Street in Glen Helen Nature Preserve. And as I understand it, this facility will be renovated because of a grant that was recently acquired to update its educational displays and educational areas and so forth. So look for that in future years to come. All right, and as we start, we're going to start by descending the famous stone steps into the Yellow Springs Creek Gorge, essentially. All right, we're going to drop, probably about 100 feet, maybe 80 feet into this gorge and down to where the creek can be found. All right, so this gorge, the walls of this gorge and the bedrock is limestone, a couple of different kinds and ages, and we'll talk more about that shortly. All right, as I descend into this gorge, down the famous steps, we're of course passing through limestone formations, which are, of course, a form of rock that's created from ancient seabeds and lake beds. Basically the remnants, the residues of animals that collected calcium carbonate and put that into their shells, which accumulated at the bottom of these water bodies. And through geological time has gotten basically formed into rock that we know as limestone. Of course, limestone itself is a rock that you build with, walls, houses, and so forth. But of course, you also can crush limestone and to make cement or to make lime that's used in agriculture, because of its high calcium and phosphorus and contents. And now when these sorts of formations you see in a place like Glen Helen and small little gorges nearby are because there are multiple layers of this limestone, where the upper layers are a little harder than the lower layers, and they stay in place, and while the lower layers erode, and you end up with cliff faces and caves and rock shelters and those sorts of formations. And so these kinds of things are abundant throughout this area: Yellow Springs, Glen Helen, Clifton Gorge, John Bryan State Parks are all in this particular area. And some of those limestones are 400 million years old, 300 million years old. And some of them go by the names of dolomite, which you might recognize as a character in films, named for his toughness. Okay, so dolomite is a very strong form of limestone that often persists while softer layers nearby or below it erode. All right, so a lot of the cliffs and things that we have in this vicinity are dolomite, made of dolomite, with softer layers below it. All right, so in this area of southwestern Ohio, we're in Greene County. There are a number of small gorges like this, with small creeks or rivers running through them that basically were formed as the glaciers melted 15,000 years ago. Massive, ice and water flows as the glaciers melted carved out these gorges, and we're left with all kinds of interesting geological formations as a result. But today we're going to look at both natural living formations and some more geological formations. So let's just continue to descend the stairs here. These stairs have been rebuilt probably a numerous times since they were first put in, but more recently, within the last 10 years. And you can see how well worn these stones are. When you walk down here, you have to be a little careful. They can be a little, they're sort of polished from so much foot traffic. This is a very popular nature preserve, and so you got to be careful as you walk down these stairs. But nonetheless, these stairs have been traversed by thousands of people who visited this park or Yellow Springs in general over the years. Okay, now, one of the main features I wanted to see today, because it's such a beautiful day. It's November 14th. It's still about 60 degrees and sunny, which is beautiful, a little warmer than it should be this time of year, but you know, I got to take advantage of it while I'm out here. But that feature is a really large beaver dam that beavers have constructed down here on Yellow Springs Creek in the last 3 to 4 years. And it's impressive. It's really transformed this little valley. And let's take a look at a few things before I really show you the beaver dam as a whole. So this is a wooden bridge that crosses Yellow Springs Creek. So right now we're looking downstream at Yellow Springs Creek. In fact, it's a free-flowing stream. It seems to be backed up a little bit, like there might be another small dam south of where I am right now. I'm here at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But again, starting about 3.5 years ago or so, beavers, which have traversed this area for decades, a couple of decades probably, decided to finally stay put and construct a huge dam on Yellow Springs Creek. All right, so this dam is impressive at this point. It's at this point from the creek bed to the top of the dam that you see in front of me is probably about 6 or 7 feet tall. Okay, it's holding back a large pond at this point. Okay, and in fact, this thing, as it's grown, they've had to accommodate its growth by rebuilding the boardwalk a couple of times to make it higher and higher, which was here first, okay? But the beavers have now altered the landscape significantly, requiring the boardwalk to be rebuilt. Okay, so if you just look at the sheer size of this dam, there's a huge amount of wood in that dam. And it just entails an impressive amount of work for what appear to be a relatively small number of beavers in this spot. To be honest, for all the times I live here, all the times I've been here, I've never seen them actually working. And not that many people really have. Sometimes people come down here and think they've seen beavers, but they're really seeing muskrats, because they do a lot of their work in late evenings and overnight in some cases. They're kind of secretive, and so they're hard to catch. They're just not out in the middle of the day that often. Okay, but they have really done a great job of damming up Yellow Springs Creek and transforming this entire stream valley. All right, now those transformations include the fact that they've drowned, so to speak, a lot of the trees in this stream valley, this stream bottom. And so they've killed a lot of trees. That's just a consequence of them standing in water now. Okay, those trees out there, like there's walnuts I see, white oaks, there were ash trees formerly, a variety of species. They're just not tolerant of being in the water all the time. Temporarily so, yeah, but not permanently. They're not adapted to grow in the water. So they've died, okay? The cause of death, by the way, is essentially drowning. What it is a lack of oxygen in their root zone that causes this kind of death, right? They still had branches and leaves for a while. Everything was fine up there. The problem was at the roots, okay? When you find yourself buried underwater in mucky soils now, oxygen can become limiting. Roots need oxygen. And so they essentially drown due to lack of oxygen. So that's just a consequence, and the Glen Helen Association that now manages Glen Helen Nature Preserve has just basically accepted that as a consequence and has lived with it. You know, this is a natural phenomenon. Beavers should be here. They used to be here. And what they're doing here is just beavers being beavers. All right. So they've decided to let it play out. You know, in some situations, beavers can be considered nuisances, but, you know, that's in more of a, you know, human perspective, flooding fields or filling culverts and flooding roadways and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, it's in some cases you have to remove them or relocate them. But here they've decided to tolerate their presence. All right, so we're going to move on a little bit, talk a little bit more about them. So how do beavers construct their dam? Well, it's really not that difficult to figure out. They block the stream flow with sticks. And it's not only sticks that they cut and haul here, okay, with their teeth, of course, chew down and break off. They gather a lot of, you know, downed wood. I see a lot of sticks in this dam that were not cut by beavers, but just dragged here and put in place. All right, so sticks cut by beavers are pretty easy to recognize. You know, they look like they've been chewed on the ends, okay? And the bark is usually completely chewed off of the sticks because, of course, they eat the bark. They live on the inner vascular tissues of a tree where the sugars, there's proteins and water are found. So, of course, they're feeding on that bark. But then, you know, after they've fed on that stick for a while or until it's stripped of bark, they'll put it in place on, you know, as a part of the dam. And so they've created a dam here that stretched the whole way. Let's see, the length of this dam, if I had to guess from what I'm looking at, is about 250 to 300 feet, probably 250 feet, I'd say, from start to end. It snakes around a little bit, but they really did an impressive job. And the deepest part of the dam is over Yellow Springs Creek itself. Okay, now they also use mud in some cases and leaves to patch holes. It's quite incredible, you know, and people who've tried to get rid of beavers know this, that if you just simply break their dam down, they'll come back and fix it. They'll repair it. They can sense, they hear where there are leaks in the dam, and they will rush to repair those cracks in the dam, essentially, with more sticks, more mud, more leaves, and so forth. And so, and it's just incredible how well fitting they stack these sticks to back up a pond like this. Okay, obviously water still flows through this, but it's filled to the brim, to the top of the dam with water. Okay, so it's just really an incredible feat. Now, beavers being beavers includes the fact that they just need to chew all the time. They have teeth that grow continuously. So even when they're not purposefully feeding on branches or a tree, they will chew on the bark of trees. And sometimes you see trees, and I'll find this somewhere here shortly, where they'll just chew the bark away from a really large tree that they kind of have no business in trying to take down, but they'll chew the bark off of the base of it anyhow. Of course, they're feeding on that, but sometimes they're just chewing to manage their teeth. All right. So this is the bottom end now. So again, this boardwalk where I'm walking now has been rebuilt a couple of times to raise it. And as I come down here, I keep thinking, you know, how high are they going to go? And where's this going to end? And I don't know yet. It seems to me like this is as high as they would want this dam to be, and that they'll just maintain it like this as long as they can. Okay, one good thing about this pond is it has killed a lot of invasive shrubs that were down here, like amber honeysuckle and privet, that were formerly located in this stream bottom and kind of hard to manage for the nature preserve. So that's a good thing. You know, it's kind of hard to see all these big trees die. Some of them probably a couple of 100 years old. But again, that's something that the preserve has accepted, and it will further transform this landscape. You know, eventually these standing trees will fall piece by piece and really open up this area to more light. And I expect a lot more aquatic vegetation, adapted vegetation to move in here. Sedges, cattails, shrubs and things that can tolerate water at their feet all the time, and an increase in the number of sort of things that use those habitats, like aquatic birds and waterfowl and so forth. So it is really interesting. It's added a really unique feature now to this preserve that that had been missing for quite some time. Okay, so now one thing that happens is that now that the water has slowed down because of this dam, there's a little downy woodpecker over here. Okay, you can see it at the base, taking a little drink at the base of a what's called a black haw viburnum. All right, little red spot on its head, taking drinks. Not too afraid of me at all at the moment. All right, cool. There you go. There's a little woodpecker action. Okay, that's a downy woodpecker. All right. The one thing that you see, since the water has slowed down, and this Yellow Springs Creek does flow through agricultural areas, it has a fair amount of nutrients in it. And those nutrients then, instead of getting flushed away continuously, are now being retained in this pond. And what you see in front of me is the consequences of that. A lot of algae, okay, pond scum, and other things that really take advantage of high nutrient aquatic conditions. So I'm going to get up close to the pond here and show you this really tiny plant there. Okay, those little tiny round green spots are the leaves of one of the smallest flowering plants in the world. Okay, that's called duckweed. Called that because it's something that ducks will eat, and it lives in ponds. And it really thrives in high nutrient conditions. And so right now the algae and the duckweed are sort of slowly dying off for the season. But in the midsummer, this is pretty well covered with both algae and that duckweed. And that can be a problem because what happens is this is something called eutrophication. And you see this in aquatic systems that are exposed to high nutrient loading. And what happens is you get the overgrowth of algae and duckweeds and other things that are really taking advantage of the high nitrogen and phosphorus in the water, which is very productive actually, but it can, as they decompose or are decomposed by bacteria and fungi in the water, that utilizes a lot of the oxygen in the water. So when you have high nutrients, high algae loads, algal blooms, they're called, accompanied by mass decomposition events, you get low oxygen conditions in the water. And that's bad for aquatic wildlife and even plants, right? So that's one of the consequences of that. I hear a drone being flown over the dam right at the moment. So that's kind of interesting. This is like meta, okay? I'm filming and I'm being filmed at the same time. So I think there's some guys up here maybe that are doing it. Oh yeah, we'll stop and talk once we get up there if possible. Here's an example though of a spot where the beavers have chewed this tree, the base of this tree. This is a black cherry tree. This is not the kind of tree they normally would prefer to feed on, but they've chewed the whole way around it with no real attempt to cut it down, okay? And that's what we call girdling. They will kill this tree with that kind of chewing action, okay, because they've completely wrapped around the tree, debarking it, cutting off the supply of nutrients from the roots to the shoots. They'll kill this tree just like emerald ash borer kills ash trees. And in turn, here's a small tree that they had cut off at some point. Okay, that one's not fresh, but you can always tell it's a beaver rather than, say, an axe or a saw, because you can kind of see how sharp teeth would have carved down the tree, essentially. All right. You see all kinds of random things. All right, here's a little spot. They started to chew and then they quit. Okay, and then here's one over here that they have just recently cut down. This is new. All right, so let's take a look at this. Okay, this was looks like a small white oak. Okay, and there's still fresh, you know, basically sawdust from the beavers there. Okay, so they just cut that sucker down. And of course it fell into the water. And usually out there they'll cut off all the branches and chew the bark off all the branches they want, or move them somewhere to be part of the dam and so forth. And so, yeah, that's a relatively newly cut down tree by beavers. Okay, it's just amazing what they can do. All right, so let's go down the trail a little. All right, we've advanced up the boardwalk here a little bit farther, and we're now heading north. And where just kind of to give you a further extent to this pond, I just met the drone operator who's doing a little bit of filming. And we'll look for further signs of beaver activity here, the kinds of things that they do. I think the lodge, there's at least one of their lodges is up here too. So we'll try to get a look at that. You know, people have questions about that, right? Because sometimes the lodge in this pond was not obvious. And so it's like, where are the beavers? Where do they live? In fact, you can have beavers that live in rivers that never really build what you'd consider the traditional lodge that you see sitting in the middle of a beaver pond. River occupying beavers will often build a lodge up against the bank. We always call them at home bank beavers. So they'll sort of pile of sticks like a lodge that's been collapsed and built on the side of a bank. And then they kind of crawl up underneath those sticks, partially into the soil in the bank, and they live in the bank. You'll see that a lot in large rivers where they couldn't build, you know, an obvious round lodge out in the middle of the pond. And initially, I think that's what these beavers did on the other side of the Yellow Springs Gorge here. But now I thought there were some small lodges I'm trying to get a look at, and we'll try to film those if we can. All right, so you can see the difference now, if you look down the trail here, between the side that's been completely flooded and killed by the water and what it looked like basically 3 years ago on the left side, right? A lot of that is not supposed to be here. That's amber honeysuckle again. Not good. But, we lost a lot of good trees too, so. Okay, yeah, here's one of their lodges we're going to get somewhat close to. Okay, let's see, it's kind of hard to see from the boardwalk here, but we're going to be looking into the sun as well. Okay, but one of their lodges, I'll try to shade our camera with the right spot here. Okay, straight out from me is one of their lodges. All right, and this looks to be, it built around the base of a fallen tree. There are large logs out there, But then there are sticks, there's a lot of mud, and I can see some evidence of entrances, although the entrances are usually below water. Of course, they start below water and then they enter up into the kind of the upper floor of the lodge where it's dry, where they would live and have their pups and so forth. So that's, I don't know if that's the main beaver lodge here or not, but that's one of the lodges, right? Straight out from me. Okay. So beavers are really large mammals. They're one of our larger mammals in North America. They can get up to be 50, 60 pounds or more. And that's, that's large for mammals. And especially the males. Males get large like that. Females a little bit smaller. All right, and then, yeah, again, what we've seen since the beavers made this pond is an increase in, say, muskrats. Some people confuse the two or are not sure what muskrats are. Muskrats are sort of the same color. They're like a small beaver, but they have a kind of a skinny and more rat-like tail. They don't have a broad, flat tail like a beaver. And they only get up to maybe, a large muskrat might be, 10 pounds maybe at most. So they're a much smaller animal, and they feed on, they have a lifestyle similar to beavers. They even build lodges, and they create runways, dig tunnels and burrows. But everything about them is smaller. They tend to eat smaller things, grasses, roots, cattail roots, small twigs of things. And the lodges they build are usually made out of herbaceous material, grasses and small twigs and stuff and such. So they're kind of like a mini version of a beaver, but they are a different animal altogether. Okay, and really the two should not be confused. Okay. All right, let's move on. Here's another freshly cut tree. Take a look at. Okay. And this one is really recent. You see a lot of the stump there is muddy from their feet, essentially. They had to come out of that mucky water, walk around on the ground here. So the wood chips are all muddy from their activities. There's some fresher wood chips and muddy. So you can just kind of see all kinds of different evidence of their action. I've been watching for some good footprints on the boardwalk here, which, they'll often cross this wooden boardwalk. And I haven't seen any real good footprints. If I see that, we'll take a look at them up close. Okay. All right, now here's a small tree that was just recently cut by the beavers, and it's gone. Okay, there's no sign of that one. So that means they dragged that away, took it back to the lodge or fed on it somewhere, and probably added the stick to the dam or just left it floating somewhere out there. Okay, but there's a little bit more interesting sign of beaver activity right here. Here's yet another tree that they're working on. These are really fresh. These have been worked on in the last few days, even last night probably. Okay, this is a hackberry, okay, the beavers were working on. And here you can really see the trail they've taken to get to it. Okay, and kind of muddy. I'm not dressed with the right footwear, but you can see the flattened mud there. Okay, that is where they've dragged their tails. Okay, they've kind of flattened out their muddy path here with their tails. And I see some evidence of their feet and claws. Right there is where they kind of dug in for traction. Okay, as they drag themselves and maybe some branches and stuff back out into the water. And then they will get back out into the water. All right, so some cases they will actually dig kind of their own little canal to get to good food sources. In some cases they'll actually dig that out so that it fills with water. Makes it easier for them if it's going to be like a regular route. This is very fresh. I mean, this really could have been happening earlier today. Well, while checking out the beaver dam in Glen Helen. Thought I'd show you a couple of other features that people come to Yellow Springs to see, all right, in this area. And that includes this thing behind me called the grotto. And this is a natural geologic feature that's been enhanced a little bit by human activities to sort of emphasize this little waterfall-like characteristic here and cavern that you see behind me. Okay, so this is the famous grotto. Again, it's built into the limestone rock face that's here. Okay, it's a small sort of cavern there. It only goes back probably about 10 to 12 feet. Okay, but this basically runs all year. And this water is emerging from the yellow spring above, which I'll show you in a moment, and probably some other springs that add to it. Okay, now this thing has run continuously for many thousands of years now. And so there's an interesting feature here in the landscape that you really have to look closely to appreciate. It just looks like a hill behind it, all right? But it's really mounded out. It's a mounded out formation from the actual flow of the landscape. That's called a travertine mound, all right? Travertine mound. And that's because, and that's formed after, thousands of years by this water, pulling minerals out of the ground that get oxidized and deposited out here on the surface. And over time, it just basically slowly mounds out this the land and forms this big recognizable piece of land that juts out from sort of the cliff face that I'll show you above. So that's called a travertine mound, very mineral-rich deposit that is formed by that very water that you see in front of me, okay, over many thousands of years. Okay, remember, I'm using that term many thousands because in this whole area, everything changed about 15,000 years ago with the retreat of the Wisconsin Glacier. Okay, so I'd say 11 to 15,000 years ago. All right, now, this bridge is another bridge that crosses Yellow Springs Creek. It's relatively new, put up about 8 or 10 years ago. And this bridge was built across a former man-made dam on Yellow Springs Creek. Okay, and at one time, Glen Helen was a sort of a retreat, right? And there was a hotel in the area. This was more of like a park-like atmosphere, less a natural forest. Plenty of big trees, of course, but it wasn't a nature preserve. It was a pretty heavily exploited park in terms of humans. So there's a beautiful now bridge that crosses the former dam site. And so north of me here would have been a lake where, picture an open lake with people casually rowing their love around in a rowboat, okay, or swimming perhaps, and just generally having a good time hanging out. One thing I'd like you to see, which might be hard to tell from my filming here, but this is the lower side of the dam, okay, downstream, and this is the upper side. All right, you see that the land here on the upper side is about 10 to 15 feet higher in elevation than the land on the lower side. All right, now that represents all of the sediment that this lake backed up and allowed to settle out before the dam was broken open, okay? It's really incredible, the thickness of that sediment that this lake caught. Here, if we take a look at Yellow Springs Creek, we probably see that a little bit more easily. Okay, if you just look at the banks of the creek here, they're just dirt banks, okay? And, that was all built up by the presence of the lake backing up the water and allowing the sediment to settle out. Okay, so that's all thick, rich soil down there. Okay, now south of me, the creek was free flowing most of that time. But now downstream, as I've shown you, there's a beaver dam, and it will be doing the same thing. As long as it exists, it will be catching sediment, allowing that sediment to drop out as the water slows down, and it will slowly fill up pretty much like this lake did. So at the end, this lake was probably only a few feet deep. Maybe 5-6 feet deep at most, where it might have started at 10-15 feet in spots. So that process will be repeating itself down there where the beaver dam is now, as long as that beaver dam lasts that long. Okay, so here we're just walking across this bridge, showing many of the people that were donors to this bridge or to Glen Helen in general. A lot of people care a lot about nature and the preservation of this particular area. All right, so we head to the grotto. All right, now my final goal today is to show you the famous Yellow Spring of Yellow Springs, Ohio, located in Glen Helen Nature Preserve. And so, beside me are those rocks I told you about. Dolomitic limestone on top, softer, older limestones on the bottom, and interesting geological formations, okay, along the walls of this gorge. All right, but let's take a look at the famous Yellow Spring itself, which is the reason so many people flock to this area to take the healing waters of the Yellow Spring. Let's talk a little bit about that. Hey folks, there's the Yellow Spring. Now, most people look at that and they say, well, that's not yellow, that's orange. And, they wouldn't be wrong. And as you can imagine, of the many things that might give waters that color, iron is the most likely. Okay, what you're really witnessing there is rust being deposited on the surface of those rocks, okay, from iron deposits that this water is flowing through underground. Okay, our waters here in these formerly glaciated areas of Ohio are under a lot of pressure. So this, you could call it artesian spring. It's being forced out of the ground by high pressure below ground. Okay, and as that water comes out of the ground, it encounters deposits of different minerals. Of course, it's moving through limestone rock, so there's a lot of limestone, calcium carbonate in this water. But it picks up iron from iron deposits and other formations. Interestingly, one of those kinds of iron deposits is called a vug, V-U-G-G, which is a real sort of a concretion, or the right term is escaping me at the moment, but a rich deposit of iron found in rock that the water moves through. And as it brings that iron to the surface, it mixes with oxygen, it gets oxidized, and it forms rust. And again, that rust is basically being deposited on the rocks and the leaves and so forth, and being carried downstream. And of course, this little stream will now run over the top of the travertine mound that I showed you. Maybe from this perspective, we can really get a view of the travertine mound. There's the cliff line. And all in front of me, this mounded out area of land was all minerals brought out by the water themselves. Okay? And then we're back to the cliff line. So a little bit more about the Yellow Spring then. That structure you see behind me is natural but enhanced by humans, all right? So a lot of the stonework here was done by masons to kind of enhance the features here. This would have been more of like a spring that just came out of the ground, out of the rocks in this area. So it's been enhanced, and there's a couple of little interesting features that were built into it at the time. So let's get an up-close look at those. So I don't know if you noticed as I got up close here previously, but this little outlet for the water kind of runs down a chute and it lands in a little pool right here. Okay, you can really see obviously that that was built that way so people could take a little dip out of it, a little dip of water. You know, you can drink this water. It has not been treated or anything, so it's, you know, you're at your own risk, but, you know, consuming a handful of water from this spring once a year or something isn't going to have a, you know, harm you at all. But people still don't want to recommend that you do that, okay? And so that's the Yellow Spring. And again, this area out here with these limestone rocks where it was constructed to be kind of a rock walkway. And then this was a little bit more of a pool formation in the past. It's pretty well filled in now with leaves and sediment and so forth. But it's kind of been let to go a little bit more in a natural state in the last number of decades. Now above this, up in that direction, is near where the hotel would have been built. And it was a giant grand hotel. It was about 300 feet long. And, you know, there was a dance hall here. There were picnic shelters. This was much more of an open area with some big trees, but some parkland with grass and so forth. Much more of like a, you know, park-like atmosphere rather than a natural area. And so that's a little bit about the history of Yellow Springs and the reason people came here, you know, and they still come here for these sort of same kind of reasons, to visit the Yellow Spring and hope to achieve some healing in this town. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to leave you with my favorite tree, perhaps, in this whole park, which is this giant white oak behind me. All right, this oak is probably 300 or 400 years old, and this oak would have been nearly this big to your eyes 100 years ago. It's still standing, it's majestic, and it's located just a little bit above the Yellow Spring. So I'll be back to this park again in the future, and until then, I hope you enjoyed it, and like and subscribe so you can be updated on when new episodes arrive and so forth. All right, take care. See you again.